Well, this study actually came out about a month ago, and so I decided to go to the DEC and the Department of Health to see what kind of data they had on freshwater fish in the Finger Lakes, and I just hit a brick wall. There was just nothing there. They don't have any. They didn't provide any data to me anyway on any PFAS contamination of fish in the Finger Lakes. No data. And then also their advisories, I realized, also did not mention any kind of risk at all in the Finger Lakes, in the 11 Finger Lakes. And I thought, well, that seems kind of odd. And I wondered, what is the threshold at which they put up an advisory? And that's when I realized that the Department of Health seems to see a huge difference between whether you drink your PFAS contamination or you eat it. To me, because you ingest, whether you drink or eat, they should be roughly similar. But why is it that the Department of Health requires a public water system to remediate if PFOS is over 10 parts per trillion, but they don't put out a do not eat fish advisory unless it's 200,000 parts per trillion? So compare 10 parts per trillion for drinking to 200,000 parts for eating. Why? I don't understand. And there's a lot about this story I don't understand. Well, just for starters, I can't understand why freshwater fish would be 278 times more contaminated than store-bought fish. I have no reason. It seems odd, and you wonder if there's something funny about the data sets that they were comparing in the study. But clearly, there's something going on, because the data that they're using in this report to say that there's a lot of problems in freshwater fish, those are tests that the EPA did, 501 samples from around the country, and they averaged nearly 10,000 parts per trillion of PFAS. So clearly, whatever, maybe store-bought fish are fine, maybe they're not, but clearly freshwater fish have a problem. And the question is, where is it going to be worst? And where are the hot spots? But we have, in the Finger Lakes, we're going totally blind.
I was going to say, what is the, with the report in mind and with now this story in mind, what is in your mind, what would be the next logical step for the state to take in terms of figuring out what the answer is, in the Finger Lakes and perhaps in other bodies of water around the state?
Well, I think they have been testing, and I think they have data. I just think they're not giving it out. And in fact, I should do a freedom of information request for it, because I believe that they are testing. But I think alarming fishermen is a little bit like alarming farmers. It may be unpleasant, and you stir up a hornet's nest, a political hornet's nest. And if you don't need to stir it up, you just let it slide, which is what we do with a lot of farming practices. And I think we're apparently doing it with fishing practices also. But unfortunately, the fishermen are the ones who are going to suffer for this, at least the ones who eat their own catch.
What is, I'm curious, what are the real world implications of data like this being out there, across the country? But is this something that will start to get on, anglers' radar now that, maybe there will be a little push to figure out what the hell is actually happening?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, when the news first broke about the PFAS contamination in Hoosick Falls 7 or 8 years ago, very little went on statewide at first, and gradually the state started really taking action, and that's what led to the pretty strong rules dealing with PFAS in drinking water. But there was a period of a couple of years where not really very much was happening. And we already know that the former Seneca Army Depot is highly contaminated with PFAS chemicals, but we don't know where those chemical plumes that are underneath the Army Depot are headed. Plumes generally don't stay in one spot; they generally migrate. There's a decent chance that they could reach Seneca Lake. That doesn't mean they will, but they could. We're not getting any data on that. That's Seneca Lake Guardian tried to get information from Department of Health and DEC on the PFAS plumes there. So this is something that takes years to raise awareness about. I think it's not going to happen next month. It takes a while. And this is the first story that I've seen. My story is the first one that I've seen that sort of raises this alarm, and also I think points to the fact that the Department of Health has these extremely different standards for warning about PFAS in something you drink versus PFAS in something you eat. And I don't know why they have that huge gap.
For those who maybe didn't read the story, what are some of the concerns for humans around PFAS and those getting into the human body?
Okay, well, first of all, PFAS is this class of chemicals that's in all sorts of things. It's in everything from firefighting foam to cosmetics to your sofas to your raincoat. Oh, it's in all sorts of things. It's everywhere. And in fact, it's on average, it's in Americans' blood at 4.3 parts per trillion. It's in your blood and my blood, whether we like it or not.
It's everywhere.
But here's what the study said is, okay, think of the average, the baseline in America at 4.3 parts per trillion. But if you eat a fish a week, you basically raise that 10 times. In other words, so it's a huge wallop of this dose of PFAS. Now, how that affects your health, I think that's still an up in the air question. But the latest information from the EPA is they are saying that PFAS is a big problem at very, very low doses, even less than 1 part per trillion. We've already got 4.3 parts per trillion in our blood. And they're saying even 1 part per trillion is a health concern. So, but some of the health studies are a bit, they're not categorical. They say it could cause liver and kidney problems and immune system problems. It is apparently connected to a couple of types of cancers. But that's still being researched and still a little bit up in the air.
And this, obviously, I don't think anybody really would know the answer to this question, but just you've covered the Finger Lakes and environmental issues so extensively in this region that I'm curious. We've heard about a lot of things that are a quote unquote threat to our natural environment here in the Finger Lakes, whether it's landfilling or whatever the case may be, affecting water quality. If we ever got to a point where the fish in the Finger Lakes were no longer edible, safely edible, would that kind of reach a different level of concern, I guess, for what that means for the Finger Lakes moving forward?
Well, that's it's really hard to gauge how fishermen would respond, even if you told them the fish are really dangerous. How many, if that word got out broadly, would everybody stop eating fish or fishing? I don't think so. I think it takes a long time to change habits, and people love to fish for good reason. And it would be very disappointing if this turns out to be, a fact. I mean, more likely, I think they're probably going to be, hot spots where it's a lot worse to fish than other spots. And there are probably ways that you can, if you're a fisherman and you want to continue being a fisherman, you find places that are safer to fish. You make more of an effort to find out where the risky spots are. But unfortunately, the state is not helping anybody do that. And I think that is a real problem. And in the story I mentioned Reeder Creek because it flows, right through the heart of the former Seneca Army Depot. And that place is a known PFAS hotspot that's coming right out into Seneca Lake. There's a website that I cite in the story that talks about, oh, look at the great fish that I've caught right at Reeder Creek. Now, I'm not saying those are necessarily contaminated, but it sure would be nice to know. It sure would be nice to know that somebody's testing them.
And to that point, I think this might be something that folks would probably be curious about. The Finger Lakes region, in a lot of ways, is just a network of large, broad watersheds or numerous watersheds. If it were determined that, say, a couple lakes had higher than normal levels of PFAS or whatever the case may be, the fish in those bodies of water, wouldn't it also be possible at that point that various creeks and streams and waterways that flow in between and around could also have some connected issues?
Who knows? I mean, very possibly. I think there's so much we don't know because there's a lack of testing, and maybe it's not even a lack of testing. Maybe it's just a lack of being forthright and putting the information out to the public. I think when you set the do not eat threshold at 200,000 parts per trillion, or you were basically saying we kind of don't want to report this stuff.
I was going to say, is that a level that effectively just makes it impossible to reach, or very, very unlikely?
I mean, that, if you're eating fish that are anywhere near that level, you are jacking up your PFAS in your blood. You are multiplying it in your blood. If you want to take that risk, that's okay. But it seems that New York State needs to be much more current, based on what we know about how dangerous this stuff and how prevalent it is. That we should be more current on these advisories. But that said, as I mentioned in the story, New York, as I've been criticizing it, but as bad as it is actually ahead of the curve. There are more than 30 states that have no PFAS guidelines whatsoever. At least New York State raises the possibility that there could be a problem. We have it set so high that it's rarely ever triggered. So it's really no help to the fishermen.
Right.
And that's what probably needs to be corrected.
And my last question here for you before I get you out. The thing that you are watching for next in this, what if there's another layer to this onion that you'd like to peel back and dig a little more into, as a reporter, what are you looking at next?
Well, I think the question is, do the DEC and DOH have data on PFAS in fish in the Finger Lakes? Yes or no? And then if they have it, well, let's see it and let's see what you have. And then I'd like to report on that.
All right, Peter, we will be watching and we appreciate the time. Thanks so much for taking it.
Okay, Josh, thanks.